Okay, brilliant. Okay, everybody. Welcome and good morning to this Business Bite event from the Supply Chain School and its partners. We're going to talk to you today about the People Matter Charter, with the title being, if not now, then when. We're here to give you a bit of an overview as to, if you don't know what it is, then we're going to give you an overview of what that is, how we're currently doing in performance, and what's next. What's the next stages for this? So welcome to the event. It's scheduled for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we'll keep going throughout the session, which is really good. And I will go through the agenda. In terms of what we're going to be covering today, I'll give you a little bit of housekeeping in terms of how the event's going to run. I will then give you an overview of the charter itself and how the performance is doing, and a little bit about our business plan within the school and how we're implementing this. And then we're going to hear from organisations who've been really instrumental in the creation of the charter and how they're currently doing in terms of working towards its commitments and its implementation. So you'll hear from Natalie Ritchie, who is the Supply Chain Sustainability Manager of National Grid. We'll hear from Peter Ball from Fortel, who's the Commercial and Compliance Director. And after a break, so that you can go and get a coffee and a tea and stretch your legs, we'll hear from Paul Skitt, who's the Skills and Development Director from Flannery Plant. Then, towards the end of the session, we will go through the roadmap and resources, because we have created a wealth of information that you can use if you're looking to become a signatory and haven't already, and do a questions and answer sessions towards the end. So, in terms of what we're going to be focusing on, the housekeeping of how this is going to run. For those of you who don't know me and have never met me before, my name is Helen Carter. A lot shorter hair now. I am the lead consultant of Action Sustainability, and I work within the school. Action Sustainability are the delivery partner of the school. I specialise in procurement and sustainable procurement, and modern slavery is another area of expertise that I've developed over the last 5 or 6 years. And I've pretty much been the lead, working with some brilliant partners on the creation of this charter over the last few years. In terms of housekeeping and how we're going to run, hopefully you can all hear me. Otherwise, I'll be talking to myself for the next hour and a half, which is really weird. If you have got any problems, then please send it through to our moderator, and she'll be able to help you with any technical issues. It is being recorded, the event, and we will be putting it onto the school website. So please feel free to share it if you think there's anything useful. If you have any comments or questions throughout the session, please put them into the chat box as normal. We'll try and address as many as we can. After our presenters have been speaking, so Natalie and Peter and Paul, I will open it up to questions for each of them individually, but we will do a big question session at the end as well. And on your screen, you should have an opportunity to complete a feedback form. You will see it in the chat box on the right-hand side, the link to the SurveyMonkey. There will be a link on your screen as well to collect. So please, feedback, even though we're not seeing you face to face, is still really important. So please make sure you complete that. So in terms of what we're looking at, the focus of today is around the People Matter Charter. And the reason for this session is to give you that overview. But before I do that, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. So I'm going to hopefully speak to my lovely presenter and ask her to put the poll, and there it is. There are 2 questions, and I think you'll be able to scroll down to each one. So I'd like you to vote in terms of your organisation. What are the biggest people issues at the moment? And we've got a range here of equality and diversity, modern slavery, skills and training, supply chain transparency and human rights, employment and labour conditions, health and wellbeing, or all of them. So let me know which ones. And then underneath that, you will see a second poll, which says, has your organisation committed to the People Matter Charter? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to complete that. And then when Rosie's ready and seen enough responses, she will close them for us so we can have a look at the answers. Brilliant. Okay, so in terms of what people are thinking are the important aspects, it's actually quite nice to see that we've got 28% worrying about all of them, and we haven't really focused on anything in particular. The biggest one at the moment that looks like it's top still seems to be the skills and training, which is really interesting. And health and well-being is definitely one of the biggest ones, particularly with the furloughing and the current situation we're in terms of how we're dealing with our employees in this really unusual time. So that's really good news. If we can have a look at the other survey. Brilliant. So 24%, 12 of you are signatories, which is great. I've got 4 of you that are discussing it, which is brilliant. And the 13, hopefully I can let you know why, or I'll give you a bit of information in terms of what you can take back to your business plans. And tell me why we should. Okay, well, hopefully we'll give you that business case by Peter, Paul and Natalie today. So brilliant news and a really good overview. Okay, so what is the People Matter Charter? For those of you who don't know, for those of you who are thinking about it, the school's been working on this charter for probably about 2 years in terms of its development and its rollout. Some of you may have been to the event in January, which was the big launch, where we were explaining what the charter is and how it works. But fundamentally, the charter came about because it was articulated quite well at that session in terms of people are probably our most important resource. No matter what we do, unless we replace everything with robots, which I know some people are talking about, we need people. And we need a lot of people to be able to deliver what we're doing. So we do strongly feel that the Charter is about making sure that we are looking at attracting, recruiting and retaining the best talent possible for our industry. And we recognise that to do this, the school has a part to play, and our partners, the school is the partners, not just the delivery service, to engage and to educate. And more importantly, our ultimate ambition is to measure the impact, which some of you may be struggling with or trying to do right now. In terms of how we're going to do that, we decided that the best way to do that was to create these series of commitments. And we have the charter, which fundamentally is looking at 8 particular areas at this present moment in time. We've got equality, diversity and inclusion. And some of you will probably be aware of FIR, and some of you may have FIR ambassadors in your organisation. So equality, diversity and inclusion is about having a strategy and implementing the right practices in your organisations to ensure that you have a diverse and inclusive workforce and that everybody's being treated equally. And you may be demonstrating some of that through the FIR programme. You've already intimated that skills and training is still really, really important for you. So again, we're looking all the way up and down the supply chain for organisations to evidence that they're thinking about this. You may be aware that CITB is going through some really interesting financial times at the moment, but actually at the moment, the one area that they are continuing to support is things like the apprentices, things like the skills and support for organisations in this area, because they recognise that need going forward. So skills and training is about making sure that you have the right strategy in place and that you are thinking about what your workforce has the ability to do. The third one, is about mental health and social well-being. So in this one, we're talking particularly around physical, mental and social. So it's not just first aiders, it's not just mental health, but it's about everything that you're probably actually doing at the moment, realistically, to ensure that your employees are kept safe, that they are looked after in terms of the mental, the physical wellness, their exercise, their eating, just ensuring that your workforce is as fit and healthy as it possibly can be and supporting it where it needs to be. The fourth one is probably the most contentious one, and the one that does give people a little bit of pause as to whether they should sign the charter, the living wage. This one I will go into in a little bit more detail later on, but this is about ensuring that you are ranging from you're legally compliant to paying minimum wage through to eventually maybe being an accredited living wage foundation organisation. But the reality for all of these is that you're going to be in different places and you may not get to that aspiration point. It may be that you are halfway through in terms of trying to pay the living wage but won't go full foundation. That's fine. It's about ensuring that you're working on that journey, and we'll show the roadmap later on. The fifth section is called due diligence, and this is about probably more materials suppliers, where we're asking them to start thinking about human rights and supply chain transparency, which again at the moment is quite a big topic, but not necessarily with human rights, but you worrying about where things are coming from to enable you to do your job every day. So the due diligence is about ensuring that you are understanding where things are coming from and that you're being able to evidence that the right labour standards are in place. So that's more of an international feel and probably has more relevance to organisations that are purchasing materials. What that's alluding to is that within each charter, every single one of these does not apply to every single business. In the intent, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, these are areas where you may be on a spectrum of implementation and you may only ever be at basic. You may only ever be at beginners in some of them, and other areas you may decide that you want to go further into a leadership position. And the idea is that we've developed a roadmap to help you do that. And intent is that you have a plan. If you have a plan, you can sign the charter. There is no minimum requirement associated with it. The only different ones are the last three, which are what we call requirements, and these are very much legal compliance. So we would be expecting everybody to be at least legal compliance stage. And it's kind of interesting when you think about a charter why we should have legal compliance in there. But it is an area that our industry is struggling with. These are industry challenges that we have to deal with. So the sixth one, and actually arguably could be even more important over the next few months and possibly the next few years as we deal with skills and demand issues, ensuring that we have the right staff who've got a right to be working in this country, ensuring that we aren't employing people who have no legal status to do so, and the right to work checks and making sure those are in place. The seventh one is around modern slavery. This isn't about producing a statement. This is about ensuring that you have due diligence in place to recognise any potential for modern slavery in your organisation or on your sites, and that you've got a good due diligence process that's actually enabling that to be identified and victims to be supported. So there's an element of legal compliance within that one. And then the final one, which is the legal compliance around making sure people are paying their taxes, was probably the most contentious one we actually developed in this charter. But fundamentally, what's important to note is that at no point are we saying don't use umbrella companies. What we're saying is that you have to ensure that everybody has been paying the right tax, national insurance, has pension contributions, and that they have access to all of the right benefits associated with what they do, all the way up and down the supply chain, and that they're at least made aware of their entitlements. If you can find an umbrella company that can do this, that's great. And we're working with a couple of organisations to help. But it's about ensuring that everybody in your supply chain is being paid fairly and has access to the right information. So those are the 8 charter commitments. And as I said, you'll see the differences in the intent, which is about having a journey that makes you start from the beginning and go through to maybe an exemplar stage. The 6 around requirements, 6, 7 and 8 around requirements are very much about you have to at least be doing legal compliance, and they apply to everybody. Everybody has to be doing those. So it does give you a little bit of a mix and match around the charter. And if you actually read the charter online, you'll see there are varying things around hotspotting your organisation, hotspotting your supply chain, understanding which of those charter elements apply to which services and goods and subcontractors that you're doing. So it's important that you understand that it's not a case of just sign it and do the lot. It's about the plan that you take, and Natalie in National Grid will articulate that quite well, I think, later on. So that charter's been up and running now since January. Which is really good news, and actually we were really impressed and actually taken aback and surprised about the support that it's actually had and the positive feedback we've been having in terms of the way the charter is working. So what we've tried to do is then think about how we can take it to the next level. Being a procurement professional, I am not a fan of dusty policy documents that sit on a shelf that never get used. We need to continually evolve this charter, and what we've done through the business plan for the next 12 months in the school is develop resources and develop investment funds to allow us to think about pushing the charter on and making it better. So within the current targets, we are looking to increase the People Matter Charter and achieve 100 signatories by the 31st of March in 2021. And I'll explain how we're doing at the moment. We need to be able to evidence that signatories have got an improved knowledge and they understand that the 8 elements of the Charter. So some of you may have taken part in our impact surveys every year to understand how the school's helped you to do this. So there'll be sections in there that allow us to understand whether you've done that. And we're going to be talking later on around the roadmap that we've developed. That at the moment is a spreadsheet, so it's an interesting document to try and read. So one of the investment decisions that we've been making is that we will actually be looking to automate that, and we'll be looking to increase the, if you like, the teeth around the charter going forwards, to ensure that we've got the right people signing up to all of this going forwards. We are looking to ensure that that is going to happen. So even with the changes in the school and obviously the challenges we've got commercially over the next 12 months, the roadmap will be automated. It's not mandatory at the moment to complete the roadmap, to be part of that, but you can sign it. We recommend using it, but in year 2 what we'll be doing is making that mandatory. So if you become a signatory, you have to complete the roadmap online to say where you are. It is not a judgment, it's not saying you fail, it's just saying you've got to say where you are and think about how you're implementing this to make sure that this isn't a dusty document that sits on a shelf. So we are looking that we can test that out and at least make sure that we have the at least 80 of them signed up by March. The other thing that's really important is that the school isn't a signature, it isn't an auditing scheme. We've never been an auditing scheme. We trust our supply chain. So if you say when you complete self-assessments in the school that you've done stuff, we trust that you've done it. We know that the proof is in the eating when you actually then have to answer questions with your clients on these issues. We do see very quickly our partners understanding who really is addressing the issues and who isn't. But what we also recognise is that whether it's EDI, whether it's modern slavery, whether it's skills and training, you are all parts of different validation systems at the moment. So whether it's Achilles, whether it's building confidence, whether it's considerate constructors. So one of the things that we're planning on doing, hopefully this year, is looking at existing validation systems and seeing if there's ways that we can bring it in. So I've already seen a question from somebody in terms of whether it's in the ISO system. At the moment it's not, and it's not in any validation systems, but our plans to evolve this over time is to include it in there, so that we are not redesigning, creating new auditing, creating new validation systems, because the beauty of this charter is that actually you're all doing something. You're all doing something in this space anyway, and you're probably all being audited. So it's about bringing it all together in one cohesive people strategy that can be adopted by a supply chain. So that's sort of an overview in terms of what our commitments are for this year. In terms of how we're doing, no, that's not 5 million, whatever that number is, but it's 58. It's 58 signatories to date, which has been phenomenal. It's really, really quite good. I've been very impressed. And if you actually look at the screen, you can see how the signatories have divided so far. So in terms of percentage of supply chain, what I'm personally quite pleased with is the breakdown of the types of organisations that have signed this. So you can see that we've got clients, we've got main contractors, we've got suppliers, we've got plant hire companies, we've got subbies, we've got labour agencies, we've got design companies. And the beauty of the charter is that we can actually get it to fit all of those organisations. The fundamental premise is if you employ people, it applies to you. And that's one of the things that's really important. So that's actually worked out quite well, even though it's been originally looked at by labour agencies. We've got a huge range of organisations now that have signed up to the charter, which is really good. The other thing that I'm quite pleased at is we've almost got a 50-50 split with SMEs and larger organisations. And in fact, one particular SME at the launch event talked about the fact that as far as they were concerned, it was their workforce strategy. That's what they adopted. They signed it. It just gave them everything that they wanted. And the beauty is that because we're not asking for particular things to be done in certain ways, we're allowing that flexibility. It means if you've got a skills and education strategy, if it's a half a sheet for an SME as opposed to a 150-page document for a very large organisation, that's fine. You've got the same thing. It's about ensuring that what it does is fit with the way that your organisation has gone. The other thing that we're looking for in terms of monitoring this is obviously this has been created by not just sort of the delivery organisation, AS, but the partners within the school. So we're looking at the number of partners and non-partners, partners being the people who pretty much sort of help run the school and set its direction. And again, we have a 50-50 split in terms of how that is operating. So we are looking to get more partners to sign up. And obviously we've got our own internal areas in there at the moment. And we have a specific target. I think it's around about 50 or 60% of the partners to be signed up to this by the end of the year. But actually it's quite nice that one of the first first section of organisations that jumped on to this were actually non-partners but members who saw the benefit quite quickly. So that was actually really really quite useful. So that gives you an overview of where we are, and if we carry on at the rate we're going, I'm pretty comfortable and confident that we can get to the 100 that we've put in place in terms of targets, which is really useful, and I'm really quite pleased about that. In terms of next steps, in terms of what we're looking for, obviously today is about providing a bit of an overview, and I've noticed a huge range of questions in terms of going down the side, which I'll look at addressing throughout this session. But what we're looking for is organisations to start thinking about this, and if you want to commit to this, we'll show you the website later on, or it's contacting myself. The process is basically that if you commit to the charter, you don't have to be at brilliant level for absolutely everything. In fact, you don't even have to be at the beginning level. When we go into the roadmap, I'll show you what those are. You have to understand where you are against each commitment and have a plan on how you're going to implement those elements. And then if you feel you're comfortable that it's ticking all the right boxes, that you can move along the journey in the direction that is suitable for your business, you can contact me. And then what we ask for is simply three things at the moment, which is who's going to own this within your organisation. And usually it's easier for a smaller organisation to say there's one person to own it, rather than maybe some of the larger organisations where there's a multitude of departments that are involved. But realistically, you're looking for this to be adopted throughout the entire organisation. You are committing to embedding the requirements that are suitable for your business within your own organisation, which is really important, because we are big, strong believers of the fact that if you want your supply chain to do something, you should be doing it first. And then you should be looking at getting your supply chain to assess themselves using either a roadmap or thinking about signing it. And again, we're not asking for everybody to ask for every supply chain, but start with key suppliers. Just even a few is a plan of how you adopt those guys over time. And then at the moment, the impact, the way that we're measuring the impact, is to submit a case study on how you're doing this within 12 months of signing. We will be then obviously tightening the reins in terms of the roadmap will become part of the mandatory, and eventually we will be looking to create some metrics that will start to measure the actual impact associated with each of those, pretty much the same way that you're looking at with social value. They've got those elements. So that's sort of an overview of the charter. In terms of some of the questions that I'm seeing before I introduce Natalie in terms of those areas, couple of the questions that have been coming about are the number of various other codes of conduct that are in place. There's the TFL, there is the Welsh Code of Conduct, there's the Good Work Standard. So part of what we've actually done with this charter is got organisations when we came up with those requirements in there, we peer reviewed all of those elements. So if you only operate in Wales, and the Welsh Code of Conduct is exactly what you need to be operating, if I'm brutally honest, you probably don't need to sign this. But what we are looking for this charter to do is to harness the industry across the piece. So if you're signing this charter, you're also in compliance with a number of other areas, whether it is for London, whether it's for Birmingham, whether it's for HS2, whether it's for National Grid, Network Rail, Welsh Government. We've looked at all those codes of conduct. What we're trying to do is bring all of those together. We haven't gone in as a standard to make them better or worse. We've tried to make sure that they're complicit with those other areas. And this is about sort of trying to bring everybody together as a standard. And I appreciate it's a very crowded space right now. As I've said, it's not in an ISO system at the moment. And it's not going to probably be, but it would be implicit in things like ISO 2400, where you are asking for organisations to be involved in those. And in terms of levels of signatory, If I think about this, at the moment, we'll show you a web link later on, which leads you to the website that's currently got all signatories on it. We've got projects signed up, so we have some HS2 projects that have signed up individually. HS2 we're also thinking of signing, so we're talking to those guys. I would suggest we've got groups. So we've got, say, for example, Morgan Sindall have signed for their entire group and would be looking to implement this. But the idea is that what we're looking for this to be doing is signed at a level that will help with implementation. So if it's signed at group level, that is not a problem, but obviously we'd be expecting the group to be able to evidence how they've implemented it across the piece. So it's important that we understand that. The final question I'll get to before I then pass to Natalie links to Julia's comment around levels of due diligence for tier one contractors around the sort of HMRC and areas. We're currently, and I'm going to get this wrong way around, we're currently talking to FSCA, who are an organisation who do auditing and certification. We're talking to another number of organisations around the sorts of schemes that do the auditing on the tax, do the auditing on the national insurance, do the auditing on the umbrella companies to make sure everything is compliant. At the moment, we're talking about how we can work with those guys. So we may make number 8 a little bit more resilient than it currently is. It's quite high level, and you'll see the roadmap at the moment that starts off as simple as ensuring that everybody has been given access to their benefits. In fact, if I go through the roadmap now, bear with me 2 seconds. We're talking about that. You've got to be able to demonstrate that all payment mechanisms in place for employment comply with legislation in relation to tax, national insurance, pension contributions. So we are going for bare minimum legal compliance here. In terms of due diligence, it's your own internal at the moment rather than the validations. But if there are existing validation schemes, we're going to be tying into those like FSCA, those sorts of guys. There are going to be some more questions. There are quite a few coming in. So what I'm going to do is go through those and moderate those while I present you through to Natalie. And I'll catch up with some more of those questions and add those towards the end. So what I'm going to do now is introduce you to Natalie Ritchie, who's the Supply Chain Sustainability Manager, who is our first client. So if there are any clients on the line, Natalie will tell you how it's done, who's now going to give you an overview of the sort of way that National Grid have adopted this and taken it on in their own organisation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Natalie.
Okay, thanks, Helen. So I'm Natalie Ritchie. I work within the global procurement function at National Grid. So I've had responsibility for putting forward a proposal as to why we should sign up to the charter. And for us, it makes complete sense because it brings together lots of the different elements of the work that I do within procurement and the supply chain. So hopefully I'll give you a bit of context in terms of how this fits in the work I've already been doing. So it's nothing necessarily new. And then also the approach that we've taken in terms of how we would go about implementing the charter within National Grid. So in terms of a bit of context, as a business, we are regulated by Ofgem. So a lot of the work that we do within our organisation is very much aligned to our 5-year plan, and that rotates. So we're in the position at the moment of negotiating our next regulatory period from 2021 to 2026. And you'll often hear us talking about RIIO. So RIIO is revenue, which is the incentives, innovation and outputs for the organisation, and it all links into the price regulation fee that we get and the price controls that are put in place. So it's just to give a bit of context. The good thing from my perspective is in this round of negotiations, we've really strongly embedded the sustainability agenda and the supply chain responsible procurement piece. So that is now part of that negotiation. It will be part of the delivery of those plans over the next 5 years. So in terms of the context of what I work in within procurement, very standard model in terms of sustainability. So social, economic, environmental aspects. So underneath that, you'll see things like human rights, living wage, inclusion and diversity, the economic side around workforce resilience, skills, and then the environmental agenda around climate action. So you can already see some of the topics that are referenced here are already built into that People Matter Charter. So for us, it sort of brings everything together in a charter that we can promote with our supply chain. So that's just to give you a bit of context in terms of the strategy that I was working to anyway before the charter came along. Now, I'm not expecting you to read this in a lot of detail, and the slides will be sent through, but for each of those elements within our responsible procurement plan within Rio, we've made certain commitments. So we have the 3 elements of social, economic, environmental. We also have a foundational level. So in blue, the foundation element is about embedding responsible procurement. So that's a key element. In the social elements, there's the living wage, there's how we deal with people, the human rights agenda, and there's the inclusion and diversity piece. On the economic aspect, it's the workforce resilience. And then on the environmental aspect, we work around CDP and ensuring that our suppliers have carbon targets in place. So this is just to give you an overview as to how it all sort of flows. So we've got those commitments within Rio now. We've got certain tactics around it. And the charter for us is how we sort of are going to bring a lot of this to life. So what I did when the charter came into play, I started having discussions internally within our organization to basically say, you know, it's a no-brainer from my perspective in signing up to this, because we're already doing a lot of the work internally and we're already starting to promote a lot of the activity within our supply chain. So in terms of the alignment, where we started off was looking at the elements that Helen has already gone through. And then I did some mapping of those elements against our Rio plan commitments. So for each of these, I don't want to run through them in great detail, but equality and diversity, you know, we have a commitment in our Rio plan to promote equal opportunities in the supply chain. So we've already got that in place. Skills and training, we have a commitment around promoting skills in the supply chain, and we're members of the EU Procurement Skills Accord initiative. So we promote that with our suppliers already to ensure that they have robust workforce plans and strategic planning in terms of training for the key technical skills that we need as an organisation. The workforce culture one is probably one where we need to do more in the supply chain. We have a really strong agenda within National Grid as an organisation around mental health and well-being, but we probably don't promote that as well as we could in the supply chain. So that's an area that there's a little bit of a gap and that we need to do more. Living wage, we're signatories to the Living Wage Foundation, so we're already, you know, meeting that commitment at the highest level, really. The actions we need to take around that are engaging our supply chain more and making sure we get evidence that that's happening. The due diligence element, we've got a commitment around using our influence to ensure that human rights and exploitation doesn't happen in the supply chain, and that feeds into knowing where things come from in terms of the materials that we source. And then legal labour requirements, obviously within National Grid, that happens. But again, we need to look into our supply chain and get more evidence around that. But we have a commitment which aligns to our human rights element. Exploitation, again, that links to our human rights commitment. And then the payments piece, again, legal requirements, we would deliver on that, but again, promoting that in our supply chain. So everything that's in the charter, we've assessed what we do internally. So I spoke to our HR teams and they were like, well, yeah, we do all of this and beyond. So it's not an issue in terms of signing up to the charter. And there are elements where we need to do more. So to Helen's point, we're not perfect in every single aspect, but we are at least on the road to getting towards those commitments. And it completely aligns with the strategy that we had in place anyway. So it's really then bringing everything together in a holistic view in terms of what we're doing. So in terms of an action plan, and Helen will go into the roadmap and how that's structured in a lot more detail, I just wanted to give you an overview in terms of how we sort of mapped against it. And again, tiny text, but it's just trying to give you a view. So everything in green is where we think we are at the moment. So you can see for most of them, we're at quite a high level already. And as an organisation like National Grid, you would probably expect that in terms of, you know, the resources we have internally and the programmes that we have in place with our supply chain. The columns towards the end show what evidence I can give against each of those commitments, what the Rio plan is, so our plan with Ofgem, and then the column at the end is the actions that we're planning to take in terms of what do we need to do to bridge some of those gaps. So the one around mental health is probably the one where we need to do a lot more in terms of engaging our supply chain and making sure that we could share our resources that we have within National Grid to promote that agenda more effectively. But this is just giving you an overview, and as I said, Helen will go into that in more detail in terms of how you undertake that mapping on the roadmap. So in terms of some of the actions, just in summary, in terms of the focus areas that we have in place, by signing the charter, we're evidencing our promise to embed those commitments. We're the first client to sign it. As Helen said, I'm hoping that other clients will follow suit on that and also sign up to this, because from my perspective at a client level, the more that we can have common messaging and ask the same things of our supply chain, the better that is. So we're really trying to work within the school to promote that with other clients as well. Encouraging our supply chain and peers to sign up to the charter. So we're not mandating it in any way, but we're really sort of trying to promote this as something that is good to do, something that makes sense to do as a business to help you sort of structure the strategy that you may have around these topics. And it brings, as I said, all into that one element and have that holistic approach to what you're doing. So that's really key for us to promote that. If you're working for National Grid, even first tier, second tier, you should be starting to see things come through in some of the tenders that we're putting out there to support the RIIO2 plan, so that plan from 2021 to 2026. So we've got questions now in our tenders around human rights, around skills development, around the living wage, around how you would work with more local supply and make sure that you embed principles down your supply chain. So those questions are now embedded into the way we're working. And the key difference, I think, is that we're going to be monitoring that into the contracts going forward. I think I can hold our hands up and say National Grid in the past might have put a lot of detail into tenders, but we didn't necessarily manage that into how those contracts were delivered. But that is going to be a key change for the RIIO plan going forward. So some of the other elements that we're focusing on: promote fairness, inclusion, and respect. So we're wanting to get more involved in the school agenda on that, have ambassadors within our organisation and promote that with our supply chain, aligning our skills commitment to the procurement skills accord. And I'm sure some of you on the call may be members of that. If not, I can give some more information around that initiative, which would help deliver on that commitment specifically. Living wage. So as I said, we're signatories. We deliver that within National Grid. Obviously, we pay everyone the living wage requirements, but we're promoting that within our supply chain. It's in our terms and conditions. It's an expectation that anyone that works for us in our supply chain is paid the real living wage, but we haven't done the real verification around that. So we're going to be targeting some areas in our supply chain where that could be a risk. So some of the lower levels of employment where low skilled and low wages may be paid. We're going to try and focus in on those and get evidence that is being applied. And then generally to use our influence to drive positive change around human rights. So alongside this, we're signatories to the construction protocol, which is around modern slavery and human rights. So anything where we can put our voice to something and say this is important to us as an organisation, we're trying to promote that. And it all ties in under the charter. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context as to how we went about this. As somebody in procurement, I had to get sign off to the charter. I had to go through HR. I had to evidence this. I had to show that this made sense, that we were doing a lot of this work already. And this just sort of puts a rubber stamp a little bit on things that we're doing in our supply chain and within National Grid already. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview as to how we approached it. So any questions then for me specifically, and I'll try and answer them.
There's one here which you've sort of skirted on a little bit, Natalie, which is, on your roadmap, you've got a lot of green, and you're doing a lot of this already. So what do you think, what was the advantage that you spoke to your guys about signing up? What are you getting from signing up to the charter? What was your business case for it?
The way I positioned it was very much around, to that point, we're doing a lot of this already, so it evidences what we're doing, but it brings it all under one umbrella, if you like. So it brings all of the elements that we were working on in quite a siloed approach. So yes, we engage on living wage. Yes, we engage on skills. And in a similar way, I'm going out to suppliers on each of those elements separately. So it's a bit of a scattergun approach previously. So I very much positioned this to say, look, this is bringing it all together holistically under one agenda, under this charter that covers, it's not just focused on one topic, it's focusing, it's bringing all of those things together. So I guess two elements. One, we're doing a lot of this already, so it evidences it and it puts our name to it. We're using our position as the client to say we support this and we expect this within our supply chain and promote this.
Yeah.
And then it brings it all together holistically. So it sort of brings it under one package rather than dealing with things individually.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Natalie. Sue, I've seen you've made a couple of points. I know with the Welsh Code of Conduct that you guys work on. I think I probably haven't been very explicit in the way I've talked about this charter, and I do tend to ramble when I do these things. You have to bear with me, I'm getting used to them. But one of the things is that this is about the supply chain. This charter is not, we are looking for initially, yes, organisations to be doing it themselves, but then that the requirements to varying degrees are slowly and surely implemented into the supply chain down to various levels. And I think that was quite interesting in terms of the number of organisations that are signed, the number of SMEs, and the number of the fact that we've got clients, major contractors, tier ones, and a couple of tier twos. So it's about that standardisation of approach to all people matters as much as possible, so that we do have that consistency. And it does come off the back of the modern slavery requirements. The transparency requirements are about embedding those as far down the supply chain as you can. And I think that's why that's why this sort of charter was created, because actually it's not just modern slavery, but there's lots of things that we need to improve as we go further down the supply chain, and a lot of things that are working well down the supply chain that need to come back up again. So thank you, Natalie. I think that demonstrates that quite well, which is really good. I've not seen any more questions, so what I'm going to do now is pass over to Peter. Peter is the Commercial and Compliance Director from Fortel and Sky Blue Recruitment. He's going to give an overview of what they've been doing in particular areas around the Charter. So as well as what the Charter is, it's actually what they're doing to deliver against some of those commitments. So without further ado, I will hand over to Peter.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, my name's Peter. I'm the Commercial and Compliance Director for both Fortel Group and particularly Sky Blue Recruitment. And obviously we've looked at the requirements of the Charter, and a lot of them, just like Natalie has mentioned, is something that we were already doing, and certainly on a journey to achieve in principle. Today, we are going to focus on one particular element of the Charter, which is around the prevention of labour exploitation within the construction industry. In the Fortel Group have partnered with the Supply Chain Sustainability School and signed its commitment to ensuring all of the 8 principles are embedded throughout our organisation. In particular, the commitment to ensuring that we have the capacity, knowledge and resilience to identify and report issues of labour exploitation. And you can see there that obviously the Charter that's Helen's gone over and Natalie as well. So why is labour exploitation of particular importance to us as a group? Well, you can see the statistics there on the right hand side. The Home Office National Referral Mechanism saw 10,627 victims of exploitation referred in 2019. And let's remind ourselves, those are the ones that are only known about. That's an increase of 52% from 2018. So of that 10,000 odd, 6,123 individuals referred to that mechanism were victims of labour exploitation. And Fortel, as a group, are principally a supplier of labour into, amongst other things, the construction sector. Apologies, there was a slide underneath this, but I didn't understand how the animation worked. But essentially, we began our journey over 3 years ago, when the construction industry was gaining a heightened awareness of the potential risks that the exploitation of persons within its supply chain posed. This heightened awareness was driven in principle by the Gangmaster Labour Abuse Authority, whose regulatory remit was extended from the agriculture, horticultural, fisheries and food processing sectors to all industry sectors by virtue of the Modern Slavery Act, which you've all heard of, and the subsequent Immigration Act 2016, which extended its remit and gave it some additional powers. Now, we realised quite quickly that we had a number of good practices and tools, as well as knowledge, to identify things such as fraudulent right-to-work documents, fake CSCS cards. But what we didn't have was a joined-up approach in the steps that we would take to tackle a scenario where a worker or a person that we came across may be subject to some form of exploitation by another individual or corporation. In particular, the steps we as a business would take to manage that situation, bearing in mind an individual or their family members may be victims of exploitation by another. So our strategy was to ensure that we had awareness throughout our group and our group companies, and that everybody knew what modern day slavery was. We raised awareness and shared our expertise throughout our industry with our competitors as well as our clients, and that we had training on spotting the signs of exploitation, which we took from the experts, the GLAA, and delivered to all our operational staff. And we tailored that training depending on the role that the particular individual would provide in that particular scenario. And of course our policies and procedures to review them to make sure that they're adequate. But as Helen said, it's more than just a policy and procedure. We looked at our recruitment and onboarding processes. We looked at the recruitment process in particular and ensured that it contained targeted questions and interview techniques to identify potential red flags, which would cause us to look into certain issues further. Our back office functions were aligned to ensure that they did regular audits and checks, looking for things like duplicate bank accounts, accounts not in the worker's own name that may have slipped through or had changed post onboarding, and of course home addresses that have been used multiple times. These are all good indicators to investigate, but not necessarily in of themselves signs of exploitation. They are just red flags that we would look into. We looked at our mobile teams, such as our health and safety team and our compliance teams, with the training that they would go on site, and obviously they would undertake their siloed function whilst they're on site, but also being vigilant at all times with a victim-centric approach in spotting any potential signs and working with clients and other enforcement agencies to deal with those issues if they were to arise. We partnered with the relevant enforcement authorities and government bodies such as the Home Office, the Gangmaster Labour Abuse Authority, the National Crime Agency, to learn how best we could prevent any form of exploitation entering our supply chain. And at the end of the day, we're not experts, but we're there to understand what we can do and the part that we can play. With that, it looked at things that we had already embedded in our business, such as a Be Safe health and safety mobile app, where people would register sort of near misses or non-conformances. And we redesigned that to include a reporting function akin to the Unseen app to flag suspicions of exploitation or any wrongdoing that was happening on our sites. We promoted a confidential whistleblowing helpline that we already had in place, and we issued key messages such as raising mental health awareness on credit card size handouts. An example you can see on the screen in front of you. In short, a published annual statement, which is a requirement of the Modern Slavery Act, condemning any form of exploitation and setting out the steps we were taking, was not enough for Fortel. And we felt we could and certainly should do more. But importantly, we knew that whatever our group strategy was, we needed to have a joined up collaborative approach with others in order to have the maximum impact. So as part of that journey, in particular, the Sky Blue recruitment business division of Fortel worked with others in the launch of the construction protocol, which is essentially a commitment that all organisations in the GLAA would work collaboratively together, sharing information and intelligence and knowledge with each other to ensure safeguards were in place to prevent the exploitation of individuals and to identify those potentially being victims of such exploitation, and therefore they can be quickly flagged into the relevant enforcement authority or support function, such as the Home Office National Referral Mechanism, to deal with as deemed appropriate. The theme, interestingly, when we looked at the construction protocol and launched that, we've seen a number of charters also being launched, which is important to us, and certainly the Supply Chain School People Matters Charter is a good example of that, because they support the key initiatives around inclusivity and, more importantly, the moral responsibility that we as organisations have, particularly those that are placing individuals into work and assignment. Other things that we did, obviously since then, we've been working collaboratively with leading figures within the construction industry, such as tier one contractors like Kier, Balfour. We've got Morgan Sindall, the CIOB, Mace, Wilmot Dixon, to name but a few. And that's created an induction pack, various toolbox talks on modern day slavery, and of course the Are You All Right posters, which examples you can see there, which if you ever go to a major infrastructure project in the UK, you will see those dotted around on site and in various different languages. Just get that slide there. And we take on board the work that we're doing, notwithstanding all the other elements of the Charter that we're obviously working towards and achieving as well, but in particular the Principle Point 7, and we continue that collaboration, working with the rail industry, for example, with suppliers into rail, principal contractors and the Rail Safety Standards Board, establishing a working group to address what suppliers and clients are expected to demonstrate in tackling modern day slavery. And the Supply Chain Sustainability School People Matters Charter is, as I mentioned before, a really good example of that. Organisations that are on a similar journey to ours, or have yet to start their journey, can find a wealth of documents and e-learning modules provided by the Supply Chain School, which they can draw upon in order to be able to commit with confidence to the 3 requirements of the People Matters Charter, in addition to the 5 intents. And so when we started our journey, in particular around the prevention of exploitation of workers, we made a decision that we wouldn't look the other way, notwithstanding the challenges that it posed to us as an organisation. And our journey isn't over. It's ever evolving, and we continue to learn what more we can do, and certainly the support functions from the Supply Chain School help us to do that. What I can share with you is that what we have implemented to date, and what we are doing as an organisation in collaboration with clients and competitors, is yielding results. A case example I can give you is one where 3 of our employees were assigned to a particular client of ours who will remain nameless, and a third-party contractor who had a number of employees on that particular site was alleged to have been taking money from workers in order to give them shifts so that they could work. Now, not all exploitation is physical, but the mechanisms we implemented and had in place enabled the flagging of that particular issue to us, which then triggered a set of responses in terms of our procedures and policies, enabling us to have boots on the ground of competent people that had been trained, working in collaboration with the client to investigate and deal with that particular issue. The individual concerned was removed from site, and the results of our investigation were given to the police and shared with the GLA for their enforcement consideration. So that's an overview in particular of that particular requirement of the People Matters Charter that we as a group have committed to and are working towards, in addition to the other 7 elements of it as well. And I can say that with confidence, we are getting a lot of support from the supply chain school and others as well, in order to ensure that we can move forward and obviously implement the best practices that we can. So with that, thank you. And is anybody got any questions that needs to be asked?
Thanks. Thank you, sir. Nothing at the moment from the audience, but I've got a particular question. I suppose it's similar to Natalie's in terms of, obviously, with you being a labour organisation, modern slavery is really, really important in terms of understanding how to combat that. It's a massive risk for your business. What was the sort of business case for bringing everything else in the charter and signing up to that? What was the sort of internal discussions you were having as to why you committed to it?
Similar to Natalie and National Grid, a lot of the things that we were doing as an organisation, either we were required to do by law in any event, or that we were aspiring to implement as best practice. Like Natalie, we have a process whereby we look internally to map out what our gap analysis is in terms of what we need to achieve, and obviously seek approval to sign off for that. But in essence, the business case for signing the People Matters Charter is that we were doing the majority of it anyway, and for us, it's more about having the collaboration and sharing our expertise and knowledge so that we can all learn and obviously implement best practices across our group, no matter where you are in that supply chain, be it a tier 1 contractor, client, or a second tier contractor.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, well, we've got one more presentation from Paul after a brief interlude. There is no weird music, I promise you. But if you want to grab yourself a coffee or a cup of tea or anything else that takes your fancy, if we can be back ready to start again at 11:05. And we'll hear from Paul then in terms of what Flannery have been doing, particularly around the skills agenda within the People Matter Charter. So I will see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Okay, welcome back, everybody. If you've disappeared off, if you've been sitting there waiting for me to start, we're starting. Well, we're going to look now from Flannery's perspective, but before we do, just to remind you, at the top of your screen, you should see a complete the feedback form from here. So please don't forget to do that by the end of the session, although we will be sending out the SurveyMonkey link as well. So if you do miss the opportunity to, we are going to send that through. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Paul Skitt, who's been with us on the journey to create the charter from the very beginning. And he's the Skills and Development Director from Flannery Plant. He's going to talk particularly about the skills and development commitment and the work that Flannery have been doing. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Helen. And thanks for giving me and Flannery the opportunity to speak today about the People's Charter, People Matters Charter. As Helen says, we're very much talking about it from a skills perspective. Having said that, I think we thought that the Charter very much gave us the opportunity to coordinate and have a holistic approach to workforce development. So that's another key theme that I'll be addressing along the way. Just by giving a bit of background and context, I'd just like to give a bit of an overview of Flannery, the business. Some of you will be aware, some of you won't be aware, but we're a major plant hire company, one of the largest in the UK. We operate across the UK with various depots across the UK and Ireland. We have a large part of our business is hiring out operated plant to the main contractors and to the big infrastructure projects. So that's a big part of what we do. And as you can see on the slide, we have somewhere around 800 to 900 operators working for us at any one time, and around 3,500 machines available for hire. And I just point you to the one of the middle images, 1.8 years average age of our fleet. So I think the national average is about 3.6 years. So what that's telling us is that it's a very modern fleet, and we have a lot of hybrid machines, and the whole environmental aspect of plant machinery is becoming more and more important. So I just wanted to give a bit of an overview. And just in that far left corner, you've got 30 apprentices. So apprenticeships are a big part of our business, and I'll be touching on apprenticeships and skills quite a bit today. I think our people being the heart of the business is a big thing for Flannery. Flannery is it's a family business still. It was set up in the early 70s and still run by the family. Patrick Flannery is the managing director. His dad set it up in 1972, and I think so. It's now a very big business, as you can see from the previous slide. And I think it is very much a people business, a family business, and the community sort of feel to it within the business. And as the business grows, and it has been growing over the last 5 years, it's about how do you keep that sense of people being at the heart of the business, but also modernising the business to meet client demands and main contractor demands. And here on this slide, I'm just pointing out how apprenticeships, we've been very focused in terms of attracting a wider talent pool into the industry and attracting more women into the industry. I think probably only 5 years ago, we probably had 1 or 2 women plant operators, and now we have nearly 20. It's still not a lot compared to the overall operators, but we've had a targeted campaign in terms of making sure we have more women working in the business. Just a bit of context and history about the supply chain school. So I think we became partners of the supply chain school in 2018. And since then, Flannery have been working in 2 main subgroups. So that's the plant group and the labour group. And I've been very much working with the labour group. And and I've been on the journey with Helen and the team to sort of develop the roadmap. And I've been very much focusing on the skills side. So in the early part of 2020, we became a signatory of the People's Matter Charter. And as I said before, a big part of it is about the workforce development strategy that Flannery are working on already. And we felt that becoming a People's Matter signatory, becoming a signed partner of that, enabled us to look at it holistically as a whole business, look at our people strategy, look at our workforce development strategy, and make sure that we try and align that to the roadmap. And we thought the roadmap was a really good tool to test ourselves against and improve as a business. Career development and progression and having a productive and happy workforce is integral to us, and we've seen that having that over the last 5 years has enabled the business to grow. So just picking out some elements of the roadmap, as I say, I think we were coming at it very much from the workforce development side and skills side. We want to make sure that people at Flannery have the right requisite technical skills, professional skills, the technology skills linked to the new machines that we've been talking about, to make sure they can do their job well. And that's why we felt that the People's Matters Charter was a good tool for us to work closely with while we develop our workforce development strategy. We're still on that journey. We're still going through that process of aligning it to the roadmap, but we feel that will make it holistic across the business and really improve the whole plant industry by doing it in that way. We were already big supporters of fair recruitment. We were already living wage foundation signatories. So we were doing some of these things, but the point of the charter is to make sure we improve as a business. We already have a skills and training strategy, which we lead on, and it is helping us attract more people into the business. From a plant hire point of view, one of our big challenges is the shortage of plant operators. And with the likes of big infrastructure projects like HS2 getting the green light, big Highways England build, that shortage is only going to become more acute. So we felt like we had to have a holistic strategy to try and address the challenge. Just the positive workforce culture, these are just some of the things that we've been doing. We're a very sort of social company, and the 10K dash was actually something that we did for the Lighthouse Charity Foundation last Saturday, where everybody did lots of people within the business did a 10K dash, and we sort of shared pictures, and there was videos to have that sort of virtual social experience. And we've been trying to do all those types of things within the lockdown in particular. So we've been trying to keep that positive workforce culture going, even in the most difficult of times. So people and skills at Flannery, as I said, I've been talking about our workforce development and people strategy. We've had a strong apprenticeship program to attract new talent into the industry, and in fact, Flannery Plant Hire are the leading employer for Patrick Flannery chairs the Trailblazer Group, which is developing a new apprenticeship standard for construction plant operatives. So that's another aspect of trying to address that skill shortage and people shortage. We have a raft of technical training that we've been rolling out across our workforce, particularly for our operators, particularly around GPS, so global positioning systems. And the mental health and wellbeing training has been really positive for us. And in fact, we have I think we have half a dozen mental aid first aiders that support our workforce to make sure that they're aware of the support that we can give them. And all of this has led to staff retention, high staff retention, I should say. When I'm talking about as being leading advocates of training and skills, that's trying to identify what the key skills requirements are for the business, but then trying to attract new talent into the business. And what we do with that is very much engage very closely with the education sector. So that's schools, colleges, universities to some extent. We find that lots of students don't have a good understanding of what infrastructure jobs are about, and particularly plant jobs are about. So we connect with those educational organisations to talk about the career opportunities within the plant industry in particular. And with the new apprenticeships coming on stream, within the plant sector, it's a really good opportunity for us to engage with those educational organisations and widen that talent pool, get more women into construction, get more people from different ethnic minorities coming into the plant industry. And that's what we've been working on over the last 3 to 4 years. With the advent of the apprenticeships coming into plants, so there's also a plant mechanics apprenticeship, there's a hire controller apprenticeship, there's a lifting technician apprenticeship. We're able to develop career pathways within the industry, and that's another good tool for us to attract new talent into the industry. And we're doing a lot of this because we know it improves our business, but we also know that there's this big shortage that we have in these key roles. So that's one of the key reasons why we're doing this work. The future generation, I've touched on our engagement with schools and colleges, and we've been, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been engaging with lots of students in careers and skills fairs. But I'll just point you to the right-hand side of this screen. Even in lockdown, we've been doing bite-sized virtual careers events with colleges all across the country, and we're still rolling that out because we felt in March there was quite a few skills and career shows that were cancelled due to COVID-19, and we felt that this was still an important part of the year for students to then learn about career and job opportunities. So we've taken it online. We've been doing it through Zoom and Microsoft Teams and engaging with colleges and students about giving an overview of Flannery, but also the wider construction opportunities. CITB has been supporting it. HS2 has supported a recent event. So we've been doing that, and we're going to be rolling that out for the next month all across the country. And it means that we're still able to engage with students to support our people piece and our skills development piece. So things can still be done even in lockdown. So we've really enjoyed doing that, and we've had even our last event we had last week. We had 3 of the students who are online have requested an application form for our next apprenticeship intake. So we can see that these events are successful. I think that's it from me. Hopefully I've covered a bit of an overview about the skills and workforce development piece, but please, if you do have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Nothing coming in at the moment, but I've got a question for you. You sort of alluded at the end around some of the innovation that you're bringing in to look at that skills and training piece. Has the current environment and the sort of potential future environment dampened the enthusiasm within Flannery, or heightened enthusiasm within Flannery for issues around the People Matter Charter?
I think it's actually heightened it. I mean, I know very early on in the lockdown, I spoke to Patrick Flannery directly and said, what do we want to do about the sort of training centre opening and apprenticeships and other people piece? And he was very keen to accelerate it even. I think hence why we've been doing these virtual careers events. I think it's important that when HS2 and these larger projects really kick off from a plant hire point of view, that we're in a good place to meet that challenge head on. So I think by taking our foot off the gas now would not help us in the longer term. So we've been quite clear and keen to really sort of continue at a pace. We know we haven't cracked all the issues yet. There's some big challenges for the industry, but I think we're doing the things to put the right building blocks in place to make sure that we're in a good space when these big projects do start. I think we're lucky in one sense that a lot of our operators, if you think about COVID-19, there can be quite a lot of isolated work. They're working in machines. We've been able to keep the business going at a reasonable rate. We're not at full capacity, but we've been able to certainly keep the show on the road, as it were.
Yeah. Pardon the pun. So actually, I think what's been really interesting on this was if you look at the terminology from the school in terms of the group that we're looking at this, we called the group originally the Labour Group. So the perception is that this is very much about labour agencies, and if you look at the proportion of organisations in there are a lot of labour agencies. However, Paul is a shining example of a plant hire company who fundamentally believe people are as important as a labour organisation does, and I think that's quite telling. And I know, Paul, your guys have been, it's actually what I've seen very well within Flannery is the number of people that understand the charter and are really engaged in it. It's been quite positive from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to achieve. The key people that are involved in doing it, and we're just trying to make that holistic, get it rolled out across the business, so it's not done in pockets. And I think you can see that that's starting to happen. Yeah,
brilliant. Okay, thank you, Paul. Right, we're on the sort of home straight for the last element. So what I'm going to go through now is sort of how we have helped organisations, and you've seen the roadmap being alluded to quite a few times in terms of resources and enabling you to think about how you implement this. And if you feel that you've got an area that you're not really comfortable with, that you need to know more about, how we've been able to provide resources and links with other organisations to help in this area. So it was very important that when we created the charter, we made not just this document to tell everybody to go and sign it, but actually a suite of resources, or identify a suite of resources that could support an organisation in its implementation. And actually what became very apparent very quickly was that actually also we needed this roadmap. We needed this idea that an organisation could sit down and see where they are, regardless of size, regardless of where they are in the supply chain, and be able to sort of apply that to their own organisations and think about why they would sign that charter, and where their weaknesses might be and where their strengths are. So in true style, we created a web page for this. So when you go into the partners section on the website, if you click on that, you'll see groups. And you will see on your screen ringed something called the labour group. We have so much resource, it's probably quite important we show you where all this is, because there's so much on the website. Once you go into the labour group, you will see the charter ringed at the bottom. So there's a click on there that says the People Matter Charter. If you click on that, it brings you to this page, which is the People Matter Charter page. Now, this is where everything sits. What we did when the charter was created was map all the resources in the school to say, what have we already got? And what have we got lots of, and what have we not got an awful lot of? So realistically, because this charter is about bringing common approach to people strategies within our industry, getting everybody to move within their sphere of influence in the same direction, we found there was a lot already within the school. So we've already alluded to modern slavery that Peter's talked about. There is a wealth of information in there around the whole modern slavery agenda. If you go into fur, if you've not been on any of the fur courses or accessed any of the fur materials, there is so much information in there on EDI and fur. Skills and training, we have advice in there around the apprentices, and we have advice on skills strategies, and what it actually enabled us to do was work out where we were weak as well within the school. So for example, the living wage, there is not an awful lot of information in there about the living wage, if I'm brutally honest, but we have started to work closer with the Living Wage Foundation to really make sure that you've got access to all the right materials, that you understand how it works, and actually starting to talk to them about how the scheme works and whether it suits the construction industry, and influence the sorts of levels. And in fact, there will be some webinars that will be coming up throughout the next sort of 12 months from the Living Wage Foundation on how this all works and what the reality is of the scheme, rather than necessarily the myths that are battered about. So when you go into this page, you'll be able to download the document, you'll be able to click, unfortunately I haven't got animation on here so I can't show you very easily, you'll be able to click on each individual commitment, and that will take you to a wealth of resources, whether they're readable documents, whether they're e-learning modules, that you can use against each charter to really understand the knowledge behind each of those commitments. A little bit further down, underneath that charter button, you'll also see the 58 signatories that currently signed up, and each one has their logo, and when you click on it, it takes you to their homepage, so you'll be able to see what they do, which is really interesting. And also what you then can do is get access to the roadmap. Now, as you can see, this is not a small document. It's one that if you print it, I suggest you try and print on A3, breaking every sort of sustainability environmental rule going, because there's a lot of information, hence why we feel it's really important that we're looking to try and automate this, and it's a top priority for us this year. But the roadmap was created and came out of a stakeholder event that we ran in August last year, where we said it's great that we've got this charter, but how does, I don't know, a labour agency know where they sit in comparison to an organisation of tier one? How do they know what good looks like? How do they know what activities need to be in there? So we've played around with this roadmap. We've created this, and when we automate it, we'll be going back in and sanity checking it, and obviously getting even more stakeholders in to ensure that we've got as robust as possible. But for example, we use the GLAA, we've got good links with them to help create the materials for the modern slavery, what they're expecting to see, and we worked with the Living Wage Foundation for those elements. ACAS is another organisation, the Good Work Standard. We're bringing all those guys together to just give you as signatories as much information and support as you can to create this sort of people strategy for your organisation, which the charter is trying to do. So I'm going to go through, just for the next sort of 20 minutes or so before we finish off for questions and answers. I'm going to go through that roadmap in a little bit more detail, because it is probably quite fundamental in your decision making. I've seen even some of the larger organisations going, well, we're not going to sign up to the Living Wage Foundation. Well, the roadmap doesn't ask you to do that. And in fact, the commitment doesn't ask you to do that. It's talking about sort of understanding your journey towards that. And the roadmap's helping to give you that information. So the idea is that this tool is allowing you to plot your own organisation's journey. There is no comparison. There is no desire to benchmark. This is not about, even when we automate it, you going online, putting it in, and then a big tick saying you're brilliant, you're not. It's just your own personal tool. The slight difference between this and the school, however, is that when you've been using the school, you've been talking about your knowledge. So what do you know about carbon? What do you know about modern slavery? What do you know about those? This roadmap is about your organisational processes and policies, not the knowledge. So this is, what have you got in place to do stuff in these areas? So that's quite important. It's a little bit of a different distinction in terms of the way that we run a lot of the diagnostics in the school. There are 5 levels, starting at beginner, going all the way through to leader. And, you know, as an organisation, you may decide in some areas you never want to be a leader. You just want to be doing certain levels. So again, you're picking the bits that are right for your organisation. And we're not asking, I did see Manish on his questions and comments, there is going to possibly be, from some of the larger organisations, a commitment to be working in it. But at the moment, there is no commitment from any organisation to say you have to be at various levels. And as the Labour group is not keen for that to happen just yet, because we have no idea where the supply chain is in terms of performance. And it's one of the advantages of automating the roadmap, is that we can anonymously benchmark the industry in terms of where we're doing. So we've seen some organisations that's like, yes, it's easy, we're doing it anyway, to other organisations a little bit further down the supply chain that says, yeah, we're maybe doing 50% of this, but actually we know we need to do stuff in the other areas, and this will help us develop that and deliver it. So at the moment, there is no requirement to be at any specific level in your, the journey is your own. The other thing as well is that we've worded the roadmap in a way that's going to frustrate some and help others. But the idea is that the way we've worded it means it's appropriate for your business. So we are in the process at the moment of thinking about some guidelines for the roadmap on how you complete it. So people have talked about, well, if I've got investors in people, then I might be at sort of the skills and training side at leader stage. Put in there that investors in people. We're not putting in specific requirements at the moment, but you can use those to evidence what you're doing if your supply chain is asking you to evidence what you're doing. If your client is saying, how are you in these areas? We've tried to word it in a way that means that it doesn't matter what size those documents are, as long as you've got a document, it fits your business, because we do want this charter to find its way through the supply chain over time. We recognise it's a long journey. We won't get there. We won't necessarily get to 3s and 4s in 1 year. But the idea is that we get everybody to sign up. So we need to keep it as relatively general as we can. So the roadmap itself can be used to decide whether you want to sign. And I know some have done that. Do we sign it? Where are we now? Well, yeah, if we're here, then let's sign it. It's nuts not to. Understanding where you currently are, like Natalie's described earlier on, in terms of where this is where we are now, this is where we want to be. So helping you set that plan for where you need to get to. And because we do want supply chains connected, we want this charter to help harness connectivity between the different tiers. And transparency is becoming really, really, really important. It's a tool for a procurement professional to sit down and go, well, you've signed the charter, just tell me where you are, what are you doing? Give me some overview, can support PQQs, can support those areas. But the idea here is that we want this to support the discussion, not an audit. And that's why we're really, really keen to make sure that we are supporting organisations who are already auditing against each of these areas, hence why we're starting to talk to the likes of FCSA, Achilles, Building Confidence, those sorts of guys, because actually they're doing this already. And we want to be able to get this into what you're already paying for, you're already doing as a daily job, rather than creating something else. And that's quite key for us. We don't want to reinvent wheels. So if I'm going to go through the charter, I know that these slides probably will get circulated around. I know this is recorded. I don't quite know the size of the documentation, so I do apologise, but I'll talk through it as much as I can. So for each commitment, what I've done is outlined what the commitment's looking for. So if we take commitment number 1, we're looking for equality, diversity, or fairness, inclusion, and respect, particularly for construction. And we're looking eventually for organisations to go beyond just complying with the Act. The idea being that what we're looking for organisations to do is have a better employee satisfaction and an improvement in the way that people are feeling comfortable working in the workforce. So when we actually look at what the roadmap is doing, you can see at the beginner is, well, yeah, we're complying with the legislation. We are doing basically what the legislation is asking us to do. And if you think about, that's great, but what's the legislation got? Then this is where you go to the supply chain website and you click on the legislation link, or you click on the FIR link. You go through to a huge range of resources that tell you what that legislation looks like. So in behind each one of those, all the resources will then help you understand how to be able to achieve these if you're not already there. The intermediate level, and if you've noticed, we've labelled these in line with the way that the school works. So it's beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert, and leader. The intermediate level is that you have got policies, that you are looking to actively prevent workplace discrimination and harassment, and that you understand what your clients are asking for in terms of EDI and FIR, what they're asking you to do, and obviously can then deliver what your clients are looking for. In the advanced, it's also then about this not just being the domain of one person. We've got an EDI department or a FIR department, but it's about the fact that the organisation understands the business case for doing this, that you have a process that helps you communicate those benefits, and that you start to collect and monitor data. Now, again, what's quite important is that you'll see that these terminologies are quite generic, quite not huge detail behind it, and that's one of the things that we're going to be running a stakeholder event later on this year for people who've used this roadmap to say what sort of guidance do we think needs to be developed, and this is ever evolving. But we're not specifying exactly what that looks like. So if you're a small organisation, that business case may be very simple. The communication may be a daily briefing. If you are a larger organisation, apologies, Manish, I'll pick on you, but with Vinci, for example, or Morgan Sindall, or some of the other guys, they're very, very big. So obviously their responses to this would be a bit more complex. But the outcomes are still the same. It's just how you respond to them depending on the size of your business and what your business does. Through to expert, being that you're explicitly managing those biases, you're promoting cultures of fairness, inclusion, and respect, you're driving it throughout the entire organisation. And this is where we start to really get it into the organisations who really understand what they're doing, because we're starting to talk about getting it into your supply chain. So if you can see, in most cases, the beginner, intermediate are definitely more about what we're doing as an organisation, but actually you start to get into the advanced, the expert, and leader, and this is about, well, now what are you doing with your supply chain? And it's a really important part of why we didn't call this a workforce charter, because people's perception is the workforce is just who they employ. It's about people, because it's all the way down the supply chain, and these areas are where you're starting to get into that. And then leader, it's about ensuring that you've got that into your procurement processes, into your supply chain management, and that you're sharing good practice, that you're telling the world what you're doing, because fundamentally this is a collaborative charter. It's one that is trying to get everybody in the supply chain to just say, this is the way to do it. This is easy, this is not easy, this is really hard. How the hell do we come across and deal with that issue? So the sharing good practice is really important, and the school's really keen to help you do that. So the case study is very important that we're looking for at the moment to help you promote the business that you're working in. So that's the EDI. The second one is around employments and training and skills, making sure that you've got not just a strategy. So again, it's important that when we're talking about organisations, and I used to work for Carillion a long time ago, did a lot of pre-qualifications, and if I see another policy, I'll go mental. It's not about just writing a policy or a strategy, but actually implementing what it is you say you're going to do. So we've tried to word a lot of these commitments and the roadmaps to say, yes, it's great you've got policies, but actually when we're getting into advanced and intermediate, that's actually about implementation. So the roadmap, when you're looking at this, starts to talk about beginner level. You might just generally have some training. We've got some money, we'll set some guys and girls on some training. We do a bit of technical, so it's all about your technical input, but it's sort of on a who wants it and we think we might need it sort of basis. So there's no identification of skills, what's the shortages, what's the gaps. advanced. Once you get into the intermediate, you then might start putting some sort of competency system in place. You might say, well, actually, my management staff might need this, my technical staff might need that, and that actually you've got a more finalised and firmed budget that you're looking at developing and managing on a yearly basis, and that you have a plan. And again, the plan can be a one-page document, it could be a system, it could be whatever you want it to be that fits your business, but fundamentally it's something that you are looking to develop and implement. Once you get into the advanced stages, you would be looking at consistent training plans, not just focusing on technical, but other aspects that might be having supporting skills. So it could be the FIR, it could be management skills, it could be health and wellbeing skills. You've got a more holistic training plan, not just I need these apprenticeship roles, or I just need these NVQs, or I need these SIPS roles, whatever it happens to be. You also, we did look at environment. We need some connectivity with environment in there, and everybody has an environmental role to play, and it will become even more important post-COVID if we start seeing carbon being attached onto investment programs. So making sure that we are starting to look at environmental, but also then thinking about the behavioural pieces as well. And then actually good processes is, are you getting the right training? Has it worked for you? Do we need to get you training in other areas? So bringing it into that staff review stage. Expert is then about implementation and having consistent reviews, making sure that actually you've got some sort of idea of if somebody leaves, who's going to take their place. I appreciate that's incredibly hard in some of the smaller organisations, but it still needs to be considered in terms of what you need for skills going forward. And that long-term strategy, you know, thinking about how do we attract entrants into this market, especially right now when we think about what the impact of the future environment's going to look like, and the potential for the younger generation to come into an industry that historically they don't like coming into. So thinking about STEM, thinking about apprenticeships, and maybe starting to monitor and target. Now, some of this you'll need to be doing for your clients and be putting into pre-qualifications, so it all fits quite nicely with being able to evidence to your clients what you're doing, wherever you happen to sit in that supply chain. And then leader being, we've been doing it for a while. So again, this sort of articulates that the roadmap is not a one size tick done. It's a longer journey in terms of where you need to be getting to. And once you're in that expert and leader, you can stand up and say, we've been doing this, we've got a track record, here's our evidence, and here's what we'd like to share. In terms of the next commitment, commitment number 3, this is about the physical, mental and social well-being objectives, and ensuring that you've got a healthy and resilient workforce and a workforce culture. So again, we were really keen to make sure that it wasn't just about mental health, but it's about the whole holistic well-being of your workforce. And in fact, if anything, at the moment, that's being looked at considerably with this COVID outbreak, and actually what the new normal is going to look like in terms of how we deal with these things. So in here, we could be looking at things like the new flexible working, and how do we ensure that everybody's got a balanced approach to work. We need to be making sure that people are comfortable with their financial situations, that people are comfortable in terms of being able to balance their work life, and ensure that if they're like me, not going to turn into a teacher anytime soon. So right now we're actually dealing with a lot of these issues in this well-being space. So it's actually a big growth spurt for us, and a big learning area, I think, for our industry. So in a beginning stage, you may have a well-being policy. You may have one person who's very enthusiastic about it, or you might have a department that might be looking at it. We are looking at things like making sure that you've got some sort of fruit days, or it's very basic, but you're at least starting to think about it, but you aren't engaging with the supply chain. This one, we are actually sort of getting the supply chain to think about this in the intermediate stage. So we are actually picking up now the supply chain a little bit earlier in this area, but you are starting to look at low-level investments in your organisation. So right now, you're probably doing a bit more in here than you usually do. So you might be thinking about helping people in terms of their furloughing. You might be thinking about helping people in terms of setting up their home offices, if you've got home offices. Paul's alluded to, obviously, the plant operators, looking at their well-being and how they're working. So it's making sure that you're doing that from a process perspective, but you're also thinking about the financial investment necessary to do that. And then starting to think about raising awareness, just not within your organisation, but supply chains. In the advanced level, you are starting to actually make sure that well-being is considered across departments. So this isn't just your well-being in our industry tends to be shoved onto the health and safety department, but actually it's articulated around to a variety of departments, that you have a proper strategy in place, and that you're benchmarking the success of that. So we've seen some organisations that do surveys, so that might be one area to have a think about this, and that you're actually starting to incorporate your supply chain into some of these areas as well. And that's not necessarily saying you're mandating they're doing things, but this is the collaboration space. What are you doing? How can we work closer together? Or are there any schemes that we can invest with? In terms of expert, we've got a huge range of tools. It's about the measurement. It's about understanding that if you're higher up the supply chain, you could actually have a different well-being pressure from project to project. You might start to understand that well-being is very different geographically. So it's definitely showing that more finely tuned initiative around that area. And then finally, it's the basically, job sharing, flexible working, monitoring and measuring, definitely integrating it into everybody's role within the business going forward. In terms of commitment 4, this was the one that most people, a couple of the organisations that I've been speaking to says, well, we'll never do this, so we can't sign the charter. The intent is that we're looking towards paying the real living wages defined by the Living Wage Foundation. It's not about being accredited, it's about moving towards that commitment. So it's about that plan, it's about understanding what your payment is and how you're going to go forward within this. So again, at the beginner level, we hope you're all legal, we hope you're all paying the minimum wage at least, and that you're actually looking at things like the national living wage. When you go into intermediate, you might be looking at improving pay conditions for your staff. And obviously, it's a massive challenge at the moment in terms of the future economic climate. So at the moment, we may find some organisations just say, I'm at beginner level and I'm going to stay there for a while until I work out what we need to do around market pressures. But we're going to be doing some work with the Living Wage Foundation to sort of really navigate what this means and how it impacts on businesses and what the business case looks like, just to try and ensure that we are supporting some of the larger clients in their requirements and really start to think about driving it through the supply chain. And then obviously when we get into the advanced and the expert and the leader, again, like the others, it's about track records, it's about implementing and evidencing it, it's about ensuring that you're starting to think about your supply chain. And the idea here is that we are looking for the domino effect. So what we're looking to do is that you talk to your supplier, and then your supplier looks to talk to their supplier, and their supplier talks to their supplier. Very simplistic way of doing it, but it does actually work. And we can then maybe try and align those requirements going forward. Number 5 is one I'm particularly passionate about, and is probably one of the most difficult ones that we're looking at. But it's about the material supply chain due diligence. There isn't much of a distinction. There is an element of number 5 and number 6 being very similar. The modern slavery one, I can't remember the number, completely forgotten. The modern slavery one and this one being very similar. It's about the labour standards, but this is about the material supply chain. So what I'm tending to find in organisations who are dealing with modern slavery at the moment, most are focusing on their sphere of influence, which is I have ladies and gentlemen working on my site. I need to make sure they're safe. But if you actually look at the material supply chain, for example, there are huge breaches of labour standards which need a more collaborative or standard approach to the way that you purchase them. So, for example, bricks are ones that I talk quite a lot about. So at the moment, bricks are quite scarce in our industry. They're difficult to get hold of. Obviously, the demand is increasing, and hopefully supply is increasing over time. But if we're starting to import a lot more bricks, we have to be very careful where we import them from, due to a lot of labour and human rights abuses from some of the Asian continents, where we are seeing a huge increase of exports to the UK. Now, this is not one where, as you go down the supply chain, we're expecting you to solve the world's problems, but this is one where we do need the supply chain to start connecting and asking and looking at transparency. And I had a very interesting conversation last week, I think it's with Natalie actually, about the fact that for the first time she's being asked about transparency in supply chain from people who've not wanted to talk to her about it before, not necessarily with human rights being the main motivator, more to do with where are we going to get things from. So this is actually a perfect opportunity to start thinking about where are you getting materials from and how are you starting to deal with those issues around labour standards and human rights. And it's probably the one that if we actually look at the roadmap, a lot of people are going to be at the beginner stage. So the first thing is that if you assess where you get your materials from, you have no materials and you don't buy anything, then you're at beginner and you'll stay at beginner. Yes, we've assessed it, we don't buy materials, it's not applicable. You have done what you need to do and you can move on. But if you're a material supplier, so the example that I always give, who are amazing at this, is Marshalls. You know, they are probably in that expert and leader phase where they understand where the materials are coming from, they're doing the due diligence, they're checking those, they are looking at continuous improvement with their supply chain, doing the audits. So where you sit and what you do in the supply chain depends on the level of embedding within this area. So in the intermediate and advanced, you're obviously going into policy, you're going into procurement decisions being made around not sourcing materials, where there is definite issues around modern slavery and human rights breaches and labour standards, and actually then going into expert and leader, looking at track records, maybe doing collaborations and understanding how we can implement more responsible sourcing going forward. Commitment number 6 is the ones then we start to go into requirement. Most of you should be doing this, and I say this in terms of I do know that it doesn't always happen, and I'm sure lots of people on this call have probably seen examples of where gangs have disappeared on sites they've been working in because they don't legally have the right to work in this country. We've had the challenge of COVID, we have the challenge of Brexit, we have the challenge of actually making sure that we can get the right staff, and actually as demand starts to outstrip supply, corners can get cut. So this is about ensuring that you have the right checks in place to look at the right to works. And we have a few videos and a few resources that I think we got with Wilmot Dixon, who very kindly allowed us to put them online, that provide you with information on how to do those checks and how to make sure that your staff are legal and working on site and compliant. In terms of how the roadmap is looking, there is we're looking for obviously legal compliance and you understand how to do the online checks, you understand the email verifications. You then can go into intermediate, which is, but actually you might be supporting that with face-to-face, so you're going just a little bit beyond. So this is one particularly with the labour organisations who are doing quite a lot that goes beyond legal compliance in this space. And then actually we actually then starting to look at training staff to understand how to review the documentation, and that you understand how to look at the fraudulent documentation, that you've got verification processes within the supply chain, so you're asking your supply chain what they're doing, and making sure that they've got the right checks, and you may be auditing or you may be actually training them to make sure they understand what they should be doing, and then obviously looking at industry best practice to keep evolving those processes and improving those checks. The last two, which I will go into and then we can open it up to some questions, is the requirements around labour exploitation. We developed these with the GLAA and the Gang Masters Labour Abuse Authority, sorry. And basically it ranges from legal compliance, which is, have you got policies? Have you got some sort of system in place? If you've got your £36 million turnover threshold, are you doing a statement? And are you at least making your staff aware of what's going on? Intermediate might be then, well, actually, you're doing some form of awareness raising, you're doing guidance, you're starting to think about sites and how you set them up and making everybody aware of modern slavery. In fact, actually, if you take Peter's example of what they're doing within Fortel, just apply those across the boards, because that's the sort of thing that we're looking for organisations to do, not just training, but actually then having systems in place to do the right checks to ensure that if you find a victim, what happens, that you're supporting in the remediation and grievance. And actually then you're starting to go into what the transparency requirements of the legislation are asking you to do, which is starting to incorporate your supply chain into that conversation and asking them what they're doing. If you're lower down the supply chain tier, you can then use this to actually respond back up when somebody does ask you what you're doing. This is about setting up those processes. The £36 million is a red herring. Everyone has to have due diligence in place. So we've designed this so that it's not just about the statement, but actually it's about what a good due diligence system is that you can then utilise. And then the last one, the one that always gives me a headache. This is the one that is the most difficult and is the most challenging when we need the flexibility of our supply chain and the way that we have the different models that are working at the moment in terms of payments. Is the one that we have probably got the lightest touch on right now. FSCA are coming in. CSA are coming in to help us with some of those areas to fatten it out a little bit in terms of what the guidance looks like. So at the moment, we need people just to be legal. We need people to be ensuring that they are not having any access or any money taken out of their systems or out of their pay packets, sorry, for hidden payments. We need to make sure that you're complying with the various agency worker regulations, that you're complying with all the employment laws and regulations, that you have started to get a good relationship with your clients to understand the models they're looking for. I do know, particularly in infrastructure, there is a move to slightly push away from that sort of temporary labour subcontract sort of sole trader environment that goes on to labour agencies doing PAYE. That's still adopting over time and that's developing as we speak. But what we're trying to make sure is that wherever you are in the supply chain, you're being paid fairly, you're not avoiding tax, you have access to all your benefits, and you're not having any payments taken out of your pay packet that push you below the minimum wage, which we do know happens. So in this area at the moment, it's very much about the legal compliance and starting to have the conversation, but we're expecting this element of the roadmap to toughen up further as we work closer with some of the stakeholders who are talking to us at the moment, as we look at how we navigate some of the models that exist currently within the sector. Obviously, that's a whirlwind tour around the roadmap, and one of the things that we're going to be doing later on this year, it'll either be later on this year or post-Christmas, depending on whether we think it's better to do face-to-face or online, is run a specific workshop that will be looking at the roadmap in detail and allowing you to do an assessment against it if you haven't already. And we're going to be getting some of those stakeholders in to sort of get people to share their experiences. What I would suggest at the moment is, I suppose, is a call to action, if you like, is that you've heard today from a lot of individuals who've talked about how it fits in with the way their businesses are operating, how they've used the roadmap, how they've actually used one particular area of their people strategy to bolster their entire approach to people, using the charter as a mechanism to do that. So I suppose my challenge is to everybody on the call before we go into the questions is, if you haven't yet looked at the roadmap and assessed the way your business is, and you're in that 13 people that haven't thought about it, or if I got my numbers right, or the number that are thinking about it and not quite sure, take the roadmap, have a look at where you are, be comfortable and secure in the knowledge that nobody's going to say you can't do it if you aren't doing certain things. It's about where you want to be going and the journey that you're looking on, and think about whether you think you can become that 60th or even maybe 100th signatory that we're looking to put on, and also be comfortable that being part of this, you'll also get involved in that stakeholder review and allow us to start fleshing it out in the areas that we want it to go in, to make sure it's always fit for purpose and always right for you guys within the supply chain to really drive those people directions that we're looking for. So 5 minutes to go. I have a couple of questions that I've noticed that have been provided, so I'm just going to go through those on there. Right, so let's have a look. In relation to the above, hang on a second, the question, sorry, I'm going to have to just do something. In relation to the above question, right, okay. In certain instances, I do know, so there's a question here about whether there's an expectation suppliers will sign up to the code if they're not yet a signatory. We'd like you to. And obviously certain partners are starting to build it into their PQQ processes and thinking about using it as a way to evidence what you're doing within these areas. So I would suggest that it's actually quite useful from that perspective. In terms of the charter, is it linked to TISC? No, it's not linked to TISC. TISC is a transparency and supply chain website that you can go onto and have a look at everybody's statement. So the way I would look at the charter is the layers. So the charter is the commitment, it's the thing that you're going to be doing. The roadmap is then the sorts of processes and procedures that you need to have in place. Underneath the roadmap, there are a number of resources and verification schemes that we're now building, the building blocks, if you like, that you can use as evidence against each of those roadmap commitments. So TISC is one of those that you could use, and we do reference TISC and have it available on the website. So if you're ever looking to see what modern slavery statements are out there in the environment, please have a look at that website. It's very, very useful and gives you the most up-to-date information around the latest modern slavery statements. And I believe it also has a link to who signed up to the Welsh Code of Conduct as well. So that's also an area where you can bring those together. In true collaborative spirit, I've already been in touch with Sue around the Welsh Code of Conduct. We have got some alignment, and that was deliberate, but we're always looking to evolve over time and get closer, hence why we've already named a load of stakeholders that we're getting involved on. Transparency of supply chain and employment contracts is tricky. It is probably the most challenging one. I agree, Sue's put a comment in there. This is one of the reasons why it is an evolving feast. When we first created commitment number 8 about transparency of employment conditions, there was initially a conversation about we take umbrella companies and say don't use them. This may be a statement that people don't like or do like, but we can't do that. The school can't tell you what you can and can't use, but what we can do is tell you the standards that are acceptable and the standards that you should be implementing. As the charter was created, it's created as a tool that allows you as users to start the conversation then with your supply chain and then encourage them to have a conversation with their supply chain. There will always be bad practice in the construction industry. It's inherent. We've had it for a long time, and it will never completely go away. It's the same way modern slavery will never completely go away, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing something about it. So this is a mechanism that allows us to have those conversations. And in fact, when we did the launch in January, we had the organisation that does a lot of work on verification of payment conditions, HMRC. We started to talk to government about how they bring their checks in and what we can do to sort of promote those to everybody, to say these are tools and schemes that you can use. So keep your eyes out for those, because obviously as we get them and as we bring them in, and if you have any that you think we've missed, please tell us, because what we don't want to do is create a whole suite of stuff that's already out there and bringing it in. So in the employment and verifications, we are talking to government. We're bringing in a lot of the tools and guidelines and checklists that HMRC ask for, just to make people aware of what they are going forward. Bear with me. That's better. I can see now. Can you track your own progress against a roadmap and also give it a visibility of others to progress? At the moment, because the roadmap is a document that is a spreadsheet, Nikki, no. You can track your own progress in terms of obviously keep the spreadsheet going, but that's why when we talked about the budget for the school and what we were going to do, top priority number 1 is automating that roadmap. The aim then is that once you've got that roadmap, you will be able to complete it online, so click against where you are, and we will also be getting badges created that say that you're a signatory of People Matter Charter, and you'll be able to see where you're performing and not put action plans, but be able to see where you're performing going forward. The aim is then that we would like to benchmark, but that would have to be done anonymously. We're not looking to rank organisations above each other because you're all going to be different. But we do want to be able to benchmark the industry to understand that, is our level of beginners too low, or should it be higher? So that is the plan for the next 12 months. And if you want to get involved in that as a partner, please do. So in response to the question from MF above, I think in future it would make perfect sense that being a signatory, the Charter would carry a similar weighting to that of the Code of Conduct. Also, it depends on the level of compliance with the Code and Charter. Correct, it does depend on the level of compliance, and that's why we're really keen to make sure that verification systems tied in, because actually a lot of people are already auditing against various different elements of this. And in fact, talking to Sue offline, we're going to see how the charters can come closer together, because there's a very strong alignment between the two. Our company is audited in connection with ISO 27001 certification, so you've already got some of that verification, which is brilliant. And obviously the TISC signatories in the code of practice is very useful, and in fact that might be something that we could take away offline and think about how we're doing that. Alison, great that you're thinking of signing the charter, and hopefully that is exactly what we want to be able to do. When you've got pre-qualifications, you can bring in elements. You can bring in elements and demonstrate that to your supplier. So Natalie's already talked about the fact that she will see people who signed up to it almost being able to answer some of those questions, and then obviously being able to implement that further down the supply chain. Brilliant. Any more questions? I've got some in the moderating bit. Hang on. I think lots of chat going on between people, which confuses the heck out of me. I'm glad you're talking, but you have to pair with my moderation skills. I think that's mainly it in terms of the questions that have gone on. It's kind of strange being able to moderate some of those questions going forward, but I've hopefully answered any others. What I will try and say to people is that number one, please make sure you've done your feedback, but you will see my details at the end, and in fact if you want to get in touch with me directly, take info out and put my name in front at Helen, or go onto the website and you can get in touch with me that way. Really would encourage anybody to think about sort of signing up if they possibly can. If you're doing some stuff, then think about being able to articulate it. You're joining this journey, if you like, and if you've been on this and listening and thinking, well, we do stuff in this area and we'd like to come into the school and make sure that we're being included, because we can help support this, and again, please get in touch. More than happy. It's been a brilliant experience producing this, and actually the positive feedback we get always makes it really worth it. So in terms of copies of slides, I believe copies will be going out to all signatories. So in the meantime, thank you so much for all your questions. Please fill out the survey, and feel free to get in touch if you want to talk to me directly. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody. In the meantime, thank you very much.